Good morning. Oh, I don't know what that was. I'm sure it's fine. I'm gonna get a. Been thinking about. My neighbor looks like Alan Kay. Wow. Okay. Lisps. So I was messing around with. Was looking around at 100 Rabbits website, and they've got, the more I look at, the more I love. They also had like a bit of shorthand, a new style of shorthand that I hadn't seen before, and I've adopted that, and I've been messing around with that for a while. It's pretty good. It's definitely a different purpose. Serves a different purpose than the Ford improved shorthand, but still good. Very obscure, too. Obviously, like one guy made it up. Probably a few thousand people in the world who have actually seen it. So, anyways, they had a one of their tools is called Ronin, and it's a image manipulation tool written entirely in the browser. So I need to share that with someone. That's actually something that someone has requested of me. I didn't realize it. It's 55K, and I think it has all the libraries internal. Well, 55K it probably does. I haven't even looked at it, but I guess it's just a bit of JavaScript that with some built-in image manipulation libraries. Because what is your browser except a data processor and a displayer? So having it so it can do image manipulation is, that's kosher technically. They talk about my browser like, oh no, everyone's putting everything in the browser. They're like, I want everyone to put everything in Emacs. So, we're the same. We're not so different, you and I. Of course, an Electron app is very different from and JavaScript. Well, it can be standalone. Well, no. Well, there's also JavaScript interpreter weirdness. I don't know. It's too much. It's over. It is muda. It is waste. It is overproduction. It is more than needs to be there. But it also increases the accessibility to a wider variety of programmers. I have to think about it some more. The realization that all of this is, all you're doing is just twiddling bits. You're just flipping ones and zeros back and forth in different places, or, flipping ones and zeros back and forth on your hard drive, or flipping ones and zeros back and forth on a remote computer. That's why all that matters is, whatever the interface is, needs to generate the output. I had another thought. Maybe that'll come back to me. Anyways, the Ronin app tool website thing, image manipulation tool, uses a short programming language that is a Lisp dialect, which, you know me, I went full fanboy as soon as I saw that. But as I was messing around with it, I realized that I've transcended syntax. I like Lisps because there's I like them for a lot of reasons, but syntactically, there's just parentheses. That's it. You don't have to remember the different weird data types. You don't have to remember tons of syntax. That's it. You've seen it. It's parentheses. It's parentheses all the way down, man. It's parentheses all the way down. The world. The world is. I think XKCD might have done that. The world is run on Lisp. It's programmed in Lisp. But what's actually supporting it is the closing parentheses, which are just closing parens stacked up all the way down to infinity. That's what's holding the Earth up. That's good stuff. Goodness. Right. So while I'm typing all this, I realize my parentheses are getting out of whack, and it's not, I'm not indenting because I'm just typing fast. And I'm like, it would be better, like, if I didn't have to type as much syntax for this. The crop command is crop, C-R-O-P. But what would be better if it was just straight C? You type C space, and then there's a modifier or holder. It's kind of a variable for a rectangle that you can define graphically. So instead of open paren, crop, space, $, rect, close paren, it should be just C space $R or C $R. And modifying the language to do something like that would be pretty easy. Maybe not the parentheses, though. That would break things down. I don't know. The point was, all I'm doing is I'm trying to generate syntax, and that's all that's happening when you when you modify another language, or create an interpreter kind of for that language, or a meta language for that language. You're just making another layer of abstraction that's a little bit easier to interface with, that more meets your goals. The thing about this, and like I was compiling OpenSCAD last night, and like if you just do apt get, you're not getting the latest, or even it might be years old actually. But running that compiling, you realize that all it's doing is taking a set of instructions and compiling them for your CPU, for your hardware, for your specific use. It's also funny that the compilation lines, or the lines that are building the binaries, are like 30 lines long. GCC space, and then all of the flags for 30 lines, and then the file output. But all that compilation is doing is it's reading it's interpreting. It's reading the language. It's deciding the best way, given the flags that you give it, to generate not bytecode. Is it called bytecode? I don't know. The binary instructions, assembler instructions, basically, for your computer, for your CPU, and then putting it together. And once it's together, hey presto. But it's all just language interpretation. It's changing it from one language into another. So imagine, instead of making that crop, parentheses, C space $, rect, close parentheses. Instead, the answer is you write something in Emacs or in a separate program, or it's JavaScript. You can make make some kind of expander program or something where you write C $R, and then it expands it automatically to that syntax. You're just translating, and it comes back to that universal, the video yesterday, universal workflow, the economy of motion. You're trying to reduce the motion as much as possible to its absolute most basic. Now, to be fair, most syntax is designed to be minimal for clarity and for understanding of what you're generating. Now, you and me, if we're writing code for ourselves, it doesn't really have to be clear. It doesn't really have to be understandable. Especially if you're writing something that's just to make quick changes to things. You can comment things and make them quicker or make them more understandable, but like wasting time on syntax is not where you want to be, especially if you're doing some type of image manipulation is, it doesn't really matter if you want the same process to happen to the image or to a set of images, and you're just going to load the image, run these things, export the image, load the next image, run these things, export the image. That's perfectly fine. You know, you don't care to write syntax long form one time, and it's shorthand. I'm doing shorthand. I'm doing syntax shorthand. I just like shorthand, I guess. Economy of motion. Right. So, or obscurity. Maybe that's what I was talking about, obscurity earlier. So there's a chapter in I think the book is called The Land of Lisp, where you're basically learning how to use Lisp in, I think it uses a Steelbank Common Lisp. I'm not sure. Either way, the first section of that book covers building basically a game. So you build the structure for the game, you build the controlling, you know, the functions that allow you to do things and modify the data within the game. And then after you have it, you're able to control the game or play the game by doing open paren, you know, play game, close paren. And then you give instructions like open paren, move, space W, close paren to move west. But their point is valid and said, well, wouldn't it be better if you didn't have these parentheses? So you write a function that accepts your straight input and then expands that into the parenthetical notation so that it passes the instructions the same way you would a normal game operation. So I think I'm going to do something like that. This is also for OpenSCAD. Because OpenSCAD's syntax, like I've done paperwork on figuring out how to get, you know, how to build this up and how to make it so that it's adaptable for things like for making paddles for the Signum and the Signum, the 3 and the 3.1, and then also for PCB only 40% builds, including those that have 2U spacebars. So being able to easily generate that code without getting bogged down in OpenSCAD's syntax is ideal. And as I think about writing something like this, I immediately think, well, you know, you don't really work that much in OpenSCAD. Why don't you just do it? You know, write it long form. It might suck, but it'll take a few hours, and when you're done, you're done. You know, you're not going to be back in there for a while. And then I remember that I don't spend a lot of time in OpenSCAD because I hate the syntax. I think Matt Adarath did something similar in Clojure, but I haven't seen it or messed around with it. But I kind of don't care. I kind of just want to do this as a challenge for myself. I still need to print out some of those paddles and get some sent out to some folks to test. But I still think it's a good exercise because it leads to exactly what I was talking about. It's the economy of motion. You want to reduce the amount of motion it takes and reduce the feedback time. That's actually why I updated or I got a later version of OpenSCAD, because the preview function didn't always render on Linux 64 platforms. So it was always like the settings needed to be tweaked, and then it would get kind of stuck, and then you would have to go back in it and refresh it and like re-render and then re-preview, which was not a huge deal, but again, reduce the feedback loop. You know, make a change, observe the change. If the change is appropriate, move on to the next change. If it's not appropriate, modify it and review. You know, go back into the feedback loop. So any additional click, any additional motion, all of that stuff just makes it harder, just makes it take longer, especially when you're working on you know, something where it's, you know, if you're in Tinkercad and you drag a square, you're pretty sure that square is going to be where that square needs to be. If you're in OpenSCAD and you create a square and you drag the square, you're like, oh, well, that square is not where I need to be. I need to invert it. And then it rotates off the starting point instead of the center axis, and you're like, oh, okay, well, now I need to offset the rotation. So you're like doing more math to decide how it's going to rotate, and that resets the transposition, and you're like, well, now I'm confused. I'm gonna make the changes before that, and then flip it, and then realign it. It's an annoying process. So maybe this is a good way to do it, and maybe this will open up more opportunity for messing around with OpenSCAD without wanting to punch through the computer screen.